Sean Combs' association with the Crips, it was a little bit different. It was more out of a necessity. Bad Boy knew that when they came out here to the West Coast, they had to deal with Suge and his goons, and needed to get the same type of protection that those guys were offering to Suge, at the street level. And so for Sean Combs, it just became associated with these guys who were the enemies of his enemies. It's like that old saying, make the enemy of your enemy your friend. And that's how it kind of evolved for him.
Now, your theory effectively suggests that Sean Combs was partially responsible for some of the events that led to the murders. He enlisted the help of certain members of gangs. Give us some background as to how that all played out.
We found out about this association between Sean Combs and these Southside Crip gang members. And, of course, everybody knew about the history of conflict that had taken place between Sean Combs and Suge Knight, and between the Bloods and the Crips that they affiliated themselves with. And, of course, everybody knew of the conflict that was taking place between Tupac and Biggie. So, that set everything into its context, was this history of conflict at all those levels and between all those people.
And how did that play out into Sean Combs enlisting the affiliations of gangs in order to effectively protect himself from what he thought was a target on his back?
Well, it played out by him surrounding himself with these individuals. And, it played out the way that you would suspect more conflict. And, so if you're going to be at odds with people and you encounter those people on the street, you can anticipate something bad's going to happen. And that's exactly what took place at the MGM in Las Vegas, is that somebody from Suge's stable, a guy named Trayvon Lane, who was with Tupac at the moment, saw an enemy, saw Orlando Anderson across the lobby, and the conflict that already existed just began to, rose to the next level when they went over and attacked Orlando Anderson and beat him up. And that set everything in motion for Tupac to be shot later that night.
Now, and this may be naive, Sean Combs was a big name at the time already. He was famous. Why not take the conventional law enforcement means to when you think there's a threat on your back, or was it, or a target on your back, or was it just simply he had an image to maintain, he had to go that route?
Yeah, it's more that, he had an image to maintain. I don't think that he ever expected it to rise to this level, on the streets. But, Sean Combs in 1996 was not the Sean Combs of 2018. He was successful, but nothing like what he is now. And, he was younger, less mature, probably less circumspect, and just figured he could deal with this stuff on that street level. So going to the police, you're promoting hip-hop music and everything that's kind of at that time anti-law enforcement and anti-establishment. And, that's the voice of the music and the songs that they're promoting. So how's it going to look for him to go out and say, hey, 911, please come rescue me from my problems. I need the police. And, effectively he would be perceived as a snitch. And it's going to be hard to promote the type of music that they're promoting and promoting his image if he's also being perceived as somebody who's just a crybaby who runs to the police when they have problems.
And initially, the competing theories that you were confronted with were A, it was the Suge Knight theory, or B, the gang affiliation theory. Why were you so quickly able to rule out the Suge Knight theory at the outset of the investigation?
Well, we didn't so quickly did it. I mean, there was a methodical approach to addressing that theory. But as we did, we saw that there was nothing shoring it up. There was nothing factual that would support the theory. And in fact, the evidence was doing the opposite. It was working against that theory. And so at some point in time, when you know that you can't connect dots, you don't continue to try to draw a picture. And, all of the information that theory was based on was erroneous and problematic. And so therefore, you have to set it aside and move on. Just on the face of it, you don't hire somebody to kill your close friend, your star artist, and then you sit right next to him during the onslaught of bullets. You don't place yourself in the line of fire. If you're going to hire somebody to kill the guy sitting next to you, and it's just that alone should raise some questions about the viability of that theory.
That's exactly right. I always found that funny in terms of that theory. Now, what ultimately led you to Orlando Anderson?
Well, he was always the top suspect in 2Pac's murder because he, of course, was the one who had immediate motive. He had just gotten assaulted by 2Pac Shakur and several other gang members from Suge's stable. And so you've already got motive. You have him at that place. You know that he's got the capabilities, that it's not beyond him to go shoot somebody because he's been suspected of doing all types of other shootings and crimes, and was even a suspect on another murder. So he fit the profile of who would do it, and he had motive. So he was a natural, primary suspect from the beginning. But what locked us onto him was when his uncle, who was a co-conspirator in the murder, identified Orlando Anderson as the actual shooter and explained how Orlando Anderson retaliated along with the rest of their little crew in Las Vegas. So once we had that confirmation, we moved from theory to an evidence-backed conclusion about the murder.
And what was the role of Keefe D in your investigation? How did you stumble upon him? How did you investigate him? How did you have him talk about what happened?
So for Keefe D, we knew that he was related to Orlando, obviously. There was a family tie. We suspected that he was in Las Vegas. We knew that he was at the Peterson Auto Museum the night that Biggie Smalls got shot. So he was an extreme person of interest just by the nature of the fact he was at both, believed to be at both locations where these murders happened. And so we also knew that back in the 90s he had been approached and interviewed as a suspect, and he was not forthright and he was not cooperative. So we knew that we had to take a different approach in order to get him to, he's not just going to volunteer this information. We're going to have to compel him to talk. And so we developed a strategy, knowing that he is involved in interstate narcotic dealing. We developed a strategy to put him in a corner, essentially, and compel him to talk. And that's what we did. We built an airtight drug case against him, approached him, told him he was going to prison for the rest of his life, or he could sit down and cooperate with our murder investigation.
And the murder of Biggie Smalls, which took place 6 months after that, you claimed that was retaliation orchestrated by Suge Knight. How'd you come about that conclusion?
Well, once we got TPD talking, and he explained what had taken place the night of Biggie's murder, how he had approached Puffy and approached Biggie and, offered to provide additional security that night. And then he said, he knew that there was a bunch of members of the death row entourage that was at the location. So, Suge Knight had always been a suspect in the murder of Biggie because he had a reason to retaliate. He had been in the car right next to 2Pac when 2Pac was killed. And we know that the war started the very next day in Compton, which was evidence that it was the Southside Crips that had done that shooting. Why else would this war break out between the Mob Piru, the Bloods of Suge, and these Southside Crips? So, it was pretty apparent that Suge Knight was involved in the retaliation. We just didn't know exactly how it unfolded because we also were aware that he was in jail at the time that Biggie was shot. So he himself certainly could not have done it. So we had to kind of work through all of those, we had to work through all those issues to find out exactly how Suge Knight would have pulled that off if he had in fact been involved.
Now, to the extent that you can answer this question, you've gathered all this evidence. No arrests have been made, obviously. No warrants issued. No prosecutions initiated. As you know, the probable cause standard is so low. You claim to have all this evidence, and even if some of the active participants are gone now, conspiracy allows for such a wide net. Why do you think nothing has been done in the courtroom, so to speak?
So when you're thinking about something like this, you're not thinking about can we arrest him. It's can we successfully prosecute him? And that's the question that has to be answered. And if the DA in Las Vegas or in Los Angeles doesn't feel that they can successfully prosecute a billionaire icon with the ability to defend himself with million-dollar lawyers based on the word of a drug-dealing, convicted gang member like TPD. So it's just not a practical, pragmatic reality that you're going to be able to successfully prosecute that. And so, as well as I do, at a district attorney's office, they base their cases on the winnability of a case. And so, the decision's made not to pursue it until something else manifests itself, which it won't, because too much time's passed and witnesses are dead, and you basically got TPD squaring off in court against Puffy Combs. That's not going to go well.
Understood. So you left the department in 2010. Why did you decide to write that book, and what was that process like?
It was really interesting because it was an area, a field that I was not familiar with. So I joined forces with a really good writer, and kind of helped me to understand the process of telling narrating a story through that medium. And it was really, really educational. And it had its ups and downs, too, because I had this initially, we sold the story idea to a major publisher in New York, and we got in a very lucrative advance. And, I was really excited about having a major publisher promote the book. And so we went through that whole process of the manuscript and the editing and getting the thing, to where it can be put on bookshelves. And the last thing that the publisher did was say, okay, we have to now legally vet it. And the lawyers at Random House said, you know what, we're just not comfortable publishing a book that claims that Sean Puffy Combs had a hand in the murder of 2Pac Shakur. And so they said in good faith, they just didn't feel that, because he's very litigious, and is it in your best interest to publish a book when you might spend the amount of money that you profit defending yourself against what's in that book? So for me, it was a real disappointing situation because, I've invested my time and energy into this. And so I said, the hell with it. I'll just self-publish it. And then that took on a life of its own. And, just one blessing after another, so to speak. The book did really well, got a lot of notoriety behind it, and it becomes a really successful documentary, and then of late it becomes a television series, and those things I would never had expected. I figured I'd write the book, tell the story, do some interviews, and that'd be the gist of it. But it's a story that just keeps on giving.
How'd the book ultimately make it into documentary form?
I was contacted just out of the blue by a guy named Mike Dorsey, who was a documentary filmmaker. And he had read an article, I think an LA Weekly or some newspaper article. And he's a guy that just loves LA history, LA crime history. And so he saw this article and he reached out to me and said, hey, I'm really interested in this story. I love anything that has to do with cops and crooks in Los Angeles. Would you like to do a documentary? So, be happy to help. So we collaborated on it, and it took about a year, and he self-funded it, and then he sold it, and it did really, really well.
Were you surprised that somebody's willing to take this on? I mean, it pushes the buttons of, on one hand, the LAPD, and the other hand, some powerful people on the East Coast. Was it surprising to you that somebody was willing to go forward with this, or are you kind of expecting it?
Well, I guess I'm not surprised. I knew that I wasn't going to get any pushback from the LAPD. They didn't, I'm telling a story based on the facts that we discovered when I was working for them. And there was no denying that. And so I knew that I wasn't going to have any issues with them. I understand they probably weren't happy about it. But at the same time, they benefit from it because we're exonerating them from this public perception that had long been held that they were involved somehow in the murder of Biggie Smalls and had been somehow involved in a cover-up. So we were able to conclusively exonerate them from those claims. But at the same time, there's kind of an unwritten code that you don't talk about unsolved cases outside of, the professional environment. And so it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. But I got no negative feedback at all from any of the people that we point fingers at. Nothing from Puffy other than what you would expect. And that's to say that, it's ludicrous or whatever term he used. But no, people have been extremely receptive, and the story's been covered in every imaginable way and continues to be. I'm getting ready to go on like a little speaking tour just to talk about this case in Europe, and it's like, holy smokes, people just can't get enough of this. And but there's nothing standing in the way, that's for sure.
And then the documentary was made into film earlier this year. I know you're a producer on the film. How hands-on was your role in the production of Unsolved?
I was very hands-on initially. Like the initial collaboration with the show's creator, Kyle Long, we sat down extensively and just talked, and he'd start writing the script, and we'd make adjustments to the script. And so that pilot script, which is the basis for everything, we worked on, the two of us, exhaustively. And then once it was picked up for a series, then I was in a position to be part of the writer's room. So I would just sit in and listen to this team of writers and bounce things off each other and contribute the insights that they needed to tell the story from my experiences in working on the case. So I was involved daily. And then when we went into production and shooting, I would just be on set, and this is where I had no influence, or I'm just there to observe and to learn. But I would point out little things like, hey, maybe you should do it like this, and they would, sometimes they'd take your advice, sometimes they wouldn't. But my hands-on was mostly behind at the writing level. But once it went into production, that was left to the professionals who knew what they were doing, because that was uncharted territory for me.
Did the production crew have to hire outside experts, law enforcement experts, or were you able to, obviously, due to your experience, satisfy that role?
I could have satisfied that role, but they did bring on a guy that had more experience from the tactical perspectives. Like in the show, when you watch the cops run into a house doing a search warrant or a raid or something like that, we left that to a technical advisor named Chick Daniels, who had a long history of providing tactical consulting to the film industry. And so he was brought on as a consultant for those things, because he's much more he has much more insight. I didn't work those type of assignments. I wasn't one of those SWAT guys that that's a separate area of kind of law enforcement than the one that I went after as an investigator. So.
Understood. Now, Suge Knight, yeah. He is facing some legal troubles now. He's in the papers all the time, and he's obviously looking at a trial at the end of September. Did any of those things lend any credence to any of the claims that you made in your book and in documentaries that followed?
Well, I don't know. I mean, they're completely separate cases. Nothing that he's in trouble for now stems from his involvement in the murder of B.I.G at all. You know, there's just nothing. There's no overlap, or there's nothing connecting those. But on a kind of more of a cosmic scale, you could say that karma's catching up to him, and that some of the deeds of his past are catching up to him. But we'll see here in later on this year when he goes to trial how it's all going to play out. I don't think there's going to be, when you watch that trial, there will be zero, if any, reference to these cases that you and I are talking about. It's, his case stands on its own.
Understood. Greg, it's been so great of you to join us. Where can people go to find out more about you, about the documentary, the film, how to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so there's a Facebook page called Murder Rap, which is run by the documentary filmmaker Mike Dorsey. You can always communicate through there. You can get the book on Barnes & Noble or Amazon, an ebook or a hardcover, just the traditional, methods of buying books. And then Unsolved, the series, is now on Netflix International. I think it should be coming to Netflix America here shortly. But yeah, so you can go to Unsolved, which is the name of the series, Unsolved: The B.I.G and 2Pac Murders, or the documentary Murder Rap that you can purchase through Amazon. And I would recommend the documentary film over the book, just because in the documentary you get to hear the audio recordings of, for instance, Keith E.D. confessing to the murder, and the statements of the witnesses, the 911 tape. It comes to life in the documentary, and that's something you don't get from reading it on the pages of a book.